we are headed across the pond to the Women's Super League because there is a new vote that is happening and it's making waves. The WSL clubs are set to hold a vote to suspend relegation. So they are going to vote at the end of the season to see if this is going to stop. Now, it is part of a larger expansion plan for the women's game to have gradual growth in the top flight and the second tier championship, making both leagues with 16 teams. But the biggest why factor that is coming out of this decision to vote is essentially to help teams invest and grow their clubs without the fear of relegation. So once you've removed that threat of relegation, they're hoping it will encourage owners to invest in their women's programs. So right now, the plan is that relegation would stop from the 12-team WSL in 26 and 27, and then promotion from the championship would continue with one club being promoted each season for 4 years, resulting in 16 Women's Super League clubs. This is crazy, Jess. The news that this is dropping, it happened late last week, and the conversation is everywhere about what clubs are going to do, how they're going to vote. So if you were a voting member, would you vote to stop relegation from the WSL?
See, I had to sleep on this question. This is very hard because I'm all for opportunity for the women's game, but for me, it's a hard no, just because when you think about European football, you look at the top of the table, the best teams, and then you look at the bottom of the table. I mean, they're just crushing and sweeping through teams. And obviously, those lower tier teams, they don't have the investment right now that they should. They need to add in more superstar players to up the competition. Whereas if you just allow all these clubs to come in, you have to think about the difference between, a Man United, Man City to the lower tier teams. And you don't want to have that team just being swept every game. You don't want to be that losing organization. And this is where I like to compare the NWSL being the greatest league globally for women's soccer, is because even though Houston Dash was last season, you didn't know if they were going to lose the game. And that's how incredible the competition is here. We have the best of the best here. And so with that being said, I think it's a no for me, just because of competition, fan base that they're going to bring, and I think lack of investment with these lower tier teams.
I have to agree, Jess. I compare, my only comparison is really from, playing in France, where there's a huge drop off between the top 3, maybe 4 teams, depending on the year, depending on the investment from the men's side, which I know is different than how the US works. But the level of competition, we always talk like, we kind of can predict at the end of the Barclays Women's Super League season who's going to be in the top 4. There's always 1 or 2 teams that really get away from the entire pack. And I would love for these lower tier teams. We joke about Crystal Palace. I want them to be a good team. I really do. They have some Americans on their team. They have internationals that have gone to play there. Players that are coming up for the English national team are on that team. And I think if they have the proper investment, if they actually have the time to define their style of play, to get I don't know, just more of a sustainable background in their impression in the Barclays Super League, that's going to be a highly competitive team. And then when you know that that team is going to be there, you're going to get quality players that want to come join your team and face off against big competition like a Chelsea, like an Arsenal, like a Man United. And then that just breeds even better players for the English squad and for internationals to go and play in that league. I think they're still highly competitive, similar to the NWSL, but I do like the idea of bringing a team in that wins the championship after that year, and then they have some security to then be at that competition, develop their team, develop their squad, so that, hey, we don't know who's going to win. It's going to become a very entertaining league, in my opinion, and I'm for getting rid of relegation.
Jess, if they don't get rid of relegation, which is what you would vote, your stance on this, how how do they make it more competitive? How do they make it so teams are actually competing? Because when you think about 2 seasons ago, Bristol City came up and they were relegated after 1 season in the Super League. Only 1 win, 6 points. And Crystal Palace, through 15 games or 14 games, they've only have 1 win. It's looking like they're going to be relegated. So how do you make it competitive, more competitive than it has been top to bottom?
See, I love to use this as an example. So one of the best owners, I think, in women's football in history is Michelle King. What Michelle King did to change things for Washington Spirit, she went overseas to Europe and looked at the EPL. Hey, how are you guys successful? How are you guys taking care of your players? What do we need to invest in to make sure our team is successful? And I think to a certain extent, these clubs like a Bristol City, when you move up into, the big league, you have to invest. You have to see, okay, what can we do to, one, take care of our players, because that should be number 1 on your list. Taking care of the players first and foremost. Investing in, good training facilities. I mean, it's a long list of things. The correct trainers, the correct coach. Okay, we bumped up into the WSL. Okay, what do we need to do in order to succeed and stay here? And so this is where ownerships, everyone in the office needs to look in the mirror and be like, okay, what players can we bring in? Okay, let's try and bring in Naomi Girma. Let's try and pay her some big bucks because she's one of the best defenders. Obviously, Chelsea snatched her up, but that's just an example. But you want to try and get the best players in the world in Europe to come and play for your club moving forward, knowing that, okay, we got bumped up. We have a whole offseason. We have a whole year to prepare for this next level. And so that's where investment needs to come into par. Okay, you guys proved yourselves that you deserve to be in this league. How can you stay there? And that's where ownerships and, things like that need to look at themselves in the mirror to take care of that and make sure that that happens. But if you're going to sit here and sign these players that no one's never heard of, that's going to be a big issue. Like, oh, they're signing such and such. I don't know who that is. Where did they come from? And then they don't perform. And there's a reason for that. And that's because there are a lot of key things that are missing from these clubs. That's one, a coach being able to instill a lot of things in these players to make them better players, creating an identity, creating so many things for the team, first and foremost. Secondly, the players that they're bringing in, that's the second biggest thing. Number 3, ownership, actually investing and making sure that this team is going to be successful.
One of the issues is that, us 3, right, guys? We want investment. We know how valuable
100%.
Women's football is and can be, but that's not the case for a lot of these owners. Look at Reading, a club that was in the championship, and they actually dropped to the 5th tier because their ownership wanted to sell the club. And instead of lifting the women's program up, he decided to remove funding from the women's program and the women's side and drop them to the 5th tier. So it's not as simple as, okay, we just have to invest more. I think there's an element of, you have to support these teams to do that, because the owners clearly aren't going to do that. Otherwise, that would have already happened. I think that's why we see a lot more parity in the NWSL, because owners, and in American women's football, there is more investment and there is more buy-in, that it is not just a charity, but it is a business, and a thriving one at that. It doesn't seem like that's the case in Europe. If you're a player, Darian and Jess, do you want to go to Crystal Palace right now?
Well, no, because there's not security. My issue with this, even from the investment side, yes, which I hate when the conversation around women's soccer is these people that are investing treat it like it's a charity. It is not. It is a bad business decision to not invest in women's sports right now. You should have been on this train 10 plus years ago. So now we're seeing owners that are jumping ship. That story's terrible about Reading, but in order for a team to be successful, to even create a playing style and some fluidity between players. I mean, we interviewed Albertine Montoya, and he said, yeah, I mean, it was a rough year. It takes time to get continuity and chemistry together, just from the playing side. Then from the business side, you have to have a big enough pocket, deep enough pockets, a big enough wallet to then be there for 4 years. That's going to give them so much time, develop a bigger fan base, get more buy-in, get huge sponsors that help bite off some of those dollar signs. I mean, I think it takes time. And I don't know if the relegation, which we've seen happen over and over again after 1 year, allows that time for a team to properly establish themselves in the Super League. And I think that they need more time from the playing side and the front office, the business side. You just need time.
So D, if they do vote to remove relegation, how do teams get promoted then, right? Because the system that they have set up right now is that there will be no more relegation, and for the next 4 years a championship team would be promoted. And there's a bit of controversy around how they would get promoted. Would it be their play on the field, their finish of the season? Would it be a playoff? Would they implement a playoff system? What's the fairest way to get a team promoted from championship to the Super League?
I think if you come first in the season, say there is a big competition, or what your record over the last season, that is how you get promoted. To me, that's the merit of this team's being invested in. They have the players that are there that are going to carry them into the BWSL, into the first league, and that's the way, to me, where you create healthy competition, especially between the two leagues, that everybody has to level up. To me, it's a little simple that, they just have to be the best in the league. And that's how then you get to the next level of competition. Then there's more investment. Then it's, you have to be here for X amount of years. Let's see how you do. And then when you know that you're going to play in the Super League, Jess, I don't know about you, but that's a team that I want to go play for. That, hey, I know I can be part of something that's maybe going to take a year, 2 years, 3 years, but we're going to be a heavy hitting competitive team in the first league in England.
And I totally agree. And that's the beauty of the game. It's obviously going to boil down to stats. Obviously, you got to be that number one team in order to prove yourself, to move up, to bump up. And with that being said, when it comes to, being able to produce a good club, I love that role. That's one of my favorites. And so with that being said, I'd be all for playing for a club like that, knowing that in the future, they have a vision and they see success. Okay, how is that going to look? And if I'm a player who has played for a while, who's a veteran, help show them the ropes. I love that type of role. And so with that being said, I'd be all for it, for that type of competition and that type of challenge as well.
This is looking like a 5-year plan for this league, or 4-year plan, essentially. It would stop relegation in 26 and 27. And then they're saying that potentially relegation could be reinstated in the 2030-2031 campaign. It's not guaranteed, but just to make 16 teams in the Super Leagues. Why couldn't we just do it this year? Relegate 1 and promote 3 championship teams.
Because it's women's soccer and everything's always backwards. Everybody loves to do it the most difficult way possible. I mean, prelude to what we're going to talk about the rest of the show, but my God, everything is such a trial and error. Let's try to learn from this mistake after watching the men maybe make it for years. Let's try it on the women. I think sadly that is just what women's soccer notoriously goes through. There's a lot of other things that make sense, but I don't know. But that can be a whole separate conversation.
It really could, Lisa. It's just too simple, They like to add in a little bit of difficulty, so it's too simple. That's why.
I just read somewhere that if you have women in decision-making positions, you are 35% more likely to get a logical and quick response that is settled peacefully.
Yes.
We'll see. They should call us to be involved in this vote.
Actually.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're split right now, 1-1. I would vote for relegation to be removed, at least for the short term, allowing for these clubs to have tangible investment, to know that okay, we can have a bad year in the Super League, gathering our resources, gathering the style we want to play, having a coach. I mean, because when you look at Crystal Palace, their first year in the Super League, in the WSL this year, they've already fired their manager and had manager turnover. So you need a little bit of time as a club that hasn't competed at this top level to find your footing, at least to steady the ship. And then you can build from there. And as a player, you're more inclined to go to a club that's investing in things if you know you have time. The voting for this has not even happened yet. It'll happen at the end of the WSL season, the end of April. We're only at match day 16 of 22. But the vote will need 2/3 majority of the vote. So at least 8 clubs in each division, the Super League and the Championship, voting in pro of this. We'll keep you updated, guys, as to everything that comes. You guys know where to reach us if you need our vote and if you need our opinion on it.